We're going to talk about the stress on the banking system. And so I'm going to turn to my neighbor here, John, and ask you, why is this stressful situation different from other times when we've had financial and banking stress?
Thank you, Dean. This is different. I'm a 35-year career banker. Until last month, I would have said banks fail for one reason only. That is credit losses. They make bad loans and they exhaust their capital, typically in deep recessions. That is not what happened. I think we've seen that there is another option. This was a classic asset liability mismatch, and this is something that financial people need to pay attention to. In the case, what both of these banks had in common, the two failures, Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, these were non-traditional banks doing non-traditional things with very concentrated strategies, very concentrated bases of clients, executing an explosive growth rate strategy on an unstable deposit base. These are bad combinations for publicly insured banks that are taking the public's funds with FDIC insurance and putting them to work. Now, what happened at Silicon Valley Bank, they grew their deposits by over $100 billion in a year and a half. And they treated it like the money that's in your grandmother's checking account. They assumed it would be there forever. So this was clearly an outcome of the pandemic, the surge of deposits that was created by government stimulus. Venture capital poured billions of dollars into early stage startup technology funds, reportedly half of which banked at Silicon Valley Bank. So $100 billion comes in, the tide rolls in over a year and a half. What do? They park 57% of the bank's assets in term securities, not 30-year bonds, 5, 6-year, 7-year bonds.
Government securities?
Government securities, sure. There was nothing wrong with the nature of the securities they purchased, but the point is they purchased too much of them. The average percentage of assets for a top 100 bank in securities is about 20%. They put 57% in under the assumption that this surge, which turned out to be a bubble of deposits, would be there forever. The tide comes in, the tide goes out, they find themselves pinched for liquidity. Unfortunately, we had a historically quick run-up in short-term interest rates. You know what happens with a fixed-rate instrument. Rates go up, market value goes down. They liquidated $21 billion of their securities, which was only about a quarter of them, at a $1.8 billion loss on a Wednesday. Blew a capital hole in the bank, said, don't worry, tomorrow we're raising $2.25 billion of fresh common equity. At that point in time, the venture capitalists who were really controlling most of the client base, these technology companies, began to take a closer look and realize they were sitting on $15 billion of unrealized losses in their held-to-maturity securities and had a freak out. The next morning, Peter Thiel, the venture capitalist, goes on Twitter, says, I'm pulling all my money out. They all know each other. The bank run begins. The capital raise fails. That company failed the next day. Signature Bank had nothing to do with the asset liability mismatch, but in the aftermath of the failure, the shocking failure of Silicon Valley Bank, the market turns its attention to who else looks like this. Well, the number one bank in America that had the highest percentage of uninsured deposits above FDIC limits at 86% was Signature Bank out of New York, which used to be a New York real estate developers bank, but they executed an explosive growth strategy, becoming one of two banks for cryptocurrency exchanges. And all of a sudden, there was a loss of confidence as these New York real estate developers realized, oh my God, we are exposed to this crypto bank. Silicon just failed, and guess what? There was a bank called Silvergate the same week that was the other crypto bank that didn't fail but voluntarily closed because of the disruption in the market. So bottom line, they pulled their money out. Silicon Valley Bank had 85% of deposits uninsured. For a top 100 bank, the typical, quote, uninsured deposit amount would be about 34%. So it was a perfect storm, but these are non-traditional banks executing non-traditional strategies, explosive growth rates, unstable deposit bases. This is not your bank that you're dealing with. This is not representative of the industry. The American banking system is fine. There is no banking crisis. But this did set off a crisis in confidence.